All right, welcome everyone. Today, we're jumping into a really powerful piece of theology from Oliver O'Donovan's book, The Desire of the Nations. And what we're going to look at is this big idea, how the life, death, and resurrection of Jesus isn't just about our personal salvation. No, it goes way beyond that. O'Donovan argues it completely turns our understanding of politics and power on its head.
So right off the bat, we're hit with this huge central puzzle. It's a question that's honestly challenged theologians for centuries. Did the message change? I mean, think about it. Jesus preached the kingdom of God, right? But then the apostles come along and they're preaching Christ. So what happened? Did they just switch gears? O'Donovan's answer is a firm no. He says the early church wasn't preaching something different. They were preaching the fulfillment. They were shouting from the rooftops about what happened when the kingdom Jesus talked about finally, and I mean decisively, showed up in the person of Christ himself.
Okay, so here's how we're going to break this down. We'll start with that central problem, kingdom or Christ. Then we'll get into O'Donovan's key idea, the great representative. From there, we'll look at this as a four-act drama, see what that means for the state's new job, and finish up with how the church is meant to be a community of love. Okay, so first up, kingdom or Christ. Let's really dig into this apparent disconnect between Jesus' own message and what the early church started preaching right after him. So when you put them side by side like this, you can see why people get confused. On one hand, Jesus is all about the coming of the kingdom of God. On the other, the apostles are telling the story of the crucified and risen Christ. They do sound pretty different, don't they? And O'Donovan points out a real problem here. If you only focus on Jesus' teachings about the kingdom, what some have called Jesusology, you run into a wall. It just fails, because you end up with a version of Jesus where the most important parts of his story, the cross and the resurrection, don't really make sense. They feel tacked on, instead of being the whole point.
So how do we bridge this gap? How do we connect the kingdom and the Christ? Well, for O'Donovan, the answer, the key that unlocks the whole thing, is one powerful central idea: representation.
Now, this is absolutely key to understanding O'Donovan. In Jesus, you have two crucial roles from the Old Testament coming together. You have the king, who's the mediator of God's rule to us, but you also have the prophet or the suffering servant who represents the faithful, obedient, repentant response of humanity back to God. See what's happening? He's not just a messenger. He's this two-way street. He represents God to us, and at the very same time, he represents us to God. It's a profound idea.
And this is where we have to be really precise. O'Donovan makes a critical distinction. A lot of times we think of what Christ did as substitution. He acted instead of us, in our place, while we were kind of off on the sidelines. But O'Donovan says, no, that's not it. He calls it co-presence. It's this incredible creative act where Christ acts, and in his action, we are truly present with him. We are participating in what he does, in what he experiences on our behalf. It's not that he takes our place and we're absent. It's that in him, we are finally present before God. Our story gets wrapped up into his.
Okay, section 3. So O'Donovan doesn't want us to think about this big representative act as just a list of doctrines or theological bullet points. Instead, he presents it as a single unfolding story, a four-act drama, you could say.
So this drama, this representative act, has four movements: Advent, then Passion, then Restoration, and finally, Exaltation. Let's walk through this divine story and see how each act builds on the last to establish God's kingdom. Okay, let's unpack this four-act story. First, you have the Advent. This is the arrival of the one true representative, the one who embodies both God to us and us to God. We see this powerfully at his baptism. Second, the Passion. This isn't just a tragedy, it's the moment of judgment. The cross throws a spotlight on the ultimate conflict between God's rule and the powers of this world. It clarifies everything. Third, we have the Restoration. This is the resurrection. It's God's public vindication of his representative. It's God saying, "This is my king," as he overcomes death itself. And finally, the Exaltation. This is the ascension, where Christ is enthroned over all principalities and powers, fulfilling that kingdom promise. This whole four-part story isn't just a religious event. For O'Donovan, it is the political event that changes all of history and redefines all authority. All right, now we get to the big payoff. This is where it gets really practical. If Christ is truly exalted, if he's the king over everything, then what in the world does that mean for our secular governments right here, right now?
Well, Donovan's argument is that Christ's victory completely disarmed and demoted the powers of this world. Think about that. Their ultimate authority has been stripped away. Because the true king has taken his throne, the state gets a new, much more limited job description. And you see it right there in Romans 13. The one in authority is now God's servant, an avenger who carries out God's wrath on the wrongdoer. That's a huge shift. So this is the really crucial point to grab hold of. After Christ's exaltation, the state is no longer an end in itself. It can't define who we are. It can't claim our ultimate allegiance. That authority has been revoked. Its power has been, well, downgraded, you could say. It's now reduced to one primary task: judgment. Maintaining basic public order, punishing what's wrong, praising what's good, the biblical idea of mishpat. Its whole purpose now is to maintain a quiet and peaceful life, to basically create the social space where the church can get on with its real mission.
Okay, last section. So if the state operates by the logic of judgment and wrath, what about the church? Well, the community that Christ founded runs on a completely different operating system. I mean, it is the polar opposite.
And this, right here, gets to the very heart of the matter for our ministry. You can see the two orders side by side. The secular order is all about judgment, vengeance, the precise payment of dues. You get what you deserve. But the Christian community? It's based on love, forgiveness of enemies, unmeasured giving and service. The church is not, and I repeat, not a mini-state. We don't just mirror the world's logic. We are a new kind of society with a totally different constitution, one founded on grace, not on keeping score.
So the church's job is to demonstrate a whole new political reality, one founded on forgiveness, not on the power of the sword. Now, for us as ministry leaders and students here in Nigeria, getting this distinction right is absolutely vital. It helps us navigate our relationship with the state, right? We see it not as the ultimate power and not necessarily as our enemy, but as a limited authority with a God-given job to keep the peace. And even more importantly, it clarifies our own mission. Our primary calling is to build a community, a church, that is a living, breathing witness to God's true political order, the kingdom of grace and forgiveness. So, this all leads to a final, challenging question that O'Donovan leaves us with. If the government's role is just to keep the peace so the gospel can do its work, then what is the church's prophetic duty within that peace? How do we, as a community of love and forgiveness, speak truth to power and bear witness to the true king, all within that space secured for us by secular judgment? Now that is not just a question for a theology exam. That's a question for every one of us to take back into our ministries, into our communities, and into our daily lives.